Fleeing outlaws, the cowboy hid in a widowed Apache woman's home. He woke to her on top of him. A lone cowboy rode through this vast emptiness, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dust with each step. He was tired, bone-tired and soul-weary. His clothes were torn and his face was streaked with dirt and sweat. Behind him, he could hear the faint but persistent sound of horses riding fast. The outlaws were close, too close. He had seen their faces once before, men who had no rules, no mercy, and no fear of killing anyone who stood in their way. The cowboy's name was Jake. He was a man who had spent years traveling from town to town, trying to make a living in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. He was not looking for trouble, but somehow trouble always found him. And now, as the outlaws gained on him, he realized that he had to move fast or he would not survive the night. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, yet he pushed onward, urging his horse to go faster, even though it was exhausted too. Hours passed, the sun dipping lower and the shadows stretching long across the ground. Jake's mind raced. Where could he hide? Where could he go that these men wouldn't find him? The plains seemed endless with no forest, no town, no shelter in sight. He thought about the small cabins he had passed earlier in the day, wondering if any of them were inhabited. Most would be empty, abandoned long ago, left to the wind and the dust. But one thought stayed in his mind. Someone might be kind enough, or desperate enough to help him. Finally, as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, he spotted it. A small cabin at the edge of a grove of trees. It was simple, made of rough-hewn logs with smoke curling gently from the chimney. It looked lived in, not abandoned. His heart leapt with hope and fear at the same time. Hope because this could be a safe place. Fear because it could also be a trap or a home of someone hostile. He slowed his horse, creeping closer, keeping low and making as little noise as possible. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement near the doorway. A woman stood there, tall and strong-looking with a serious expression. Her hair was long and dark, and her eyes were sharp, observing him without a word. She seemed to measure him carefully, aware of every movement, as if she could tell at a glance that he was being chased. Jake stopped his horse a few yards away, raising a hand slowly in greeting, hoping to show he meant no harm. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice steady but wary. "What do you want here?" I mean no trouble," Jake said, keeping his voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. "I'm being chased. I need a place to hide, just for the night." The woman studied him for a long moment. There was a tension in the air, the kind that could snap in an instant. Her eyes moved to his horse, to the dust on his clothes, to the sweat on his face. She could see he was telling the truth. He was exhausted, scared, and desperate. Still, letting a stranger into her home was risky. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said finally. "If those men catch you here, it will bring trouble to me too." "I understand," Jake replied quietly. I need somewhere safe. I won't cause any harm, I promise." The woman hesitated, weighing her options. She was a widowed Apache, living alone in this cabin for years after losing her husband. She had survived the harsh life of the plains, learned to hunt, cook, and defend herself, and valued her solitude greatly. But something in Jake's eyes made her pause. There was a genuine fear there, a vulnerability that reminded her of her own losses. After a long moment, she made a decision. "Fine," she said. "You can come inside, but one wrong move and you'll regret it." Jake nodded, relief washing over him. He led his horse to a nearby corral and tied it up carefully. Every sense was on alert. He knew the outlaws might be following him, and the cabin could only hide him for so long. As he stepped inside, he noticed the warmth of the place, the smell of wood smoke and herbs, and the simplicity of the home. There was a small fireplace, a few pieces of furniture, and evidence of someone who took care to live independently and well. The woman watched him as he settled in a corner, carefully laying out a blanket and tending to a small cut on his arm. Jake was grateful for her caution. He knew better than to take her hospitality for granted. They did not speak much, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding, of two people cautiously sharing a space while both were aware of the dangers lurking outside. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying the faint sound of hooves and shouting from far away. The outlaws were still searching, but for now the cabin provided a small, fragile sanctuary. Jake could feel his heartbeat slowly slowing, though the tension never fully left him. He was a man on the run, yet for the first time that day, he felt a glimmer of hope. The woman moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, preparing a simple meal over the fire. She did not speak much to him, but her presence was steady and reassuring. Jake watched her, realizing that he had never seen such strength and calm in a person before. It was not just physical strength. It was the strength of someone who had faced life's hardships alone and survived. He felt both admiration and a strange sense of comfort in her presence. As the night deepened, they settled near the fire, neither speaking much, both aware of the silence that held them together. Jake thought about the journey that had brought him here, the mistakes, the risks, the constant flight. And he thought about the woman, living alone in this cabin, guarding her life and her memories, yet still capable of kindness in a moment of danger. Hours passed. The sounds of the outlaws faded into the distance, at least for the time being. Jake finally allowed himself to lean back against the wall, closing his eyes for a few minutes. Every nerve in his body was still alert, but he felt a strange, tentative sense of safety. The woman continued her quiet work, keeping the fire going, keeping watch, and keeping him alive without a word. In that small cabin, in the middle of the vast, harsh plains, two strangers shared a fragile connection born of circumstance and trust. One was a man running from danger, the other a woman who had survived loss and solitude. And though the night was far from over and the dangers outside were still very real, for the first time in days, Jake felt that maybe, just maybe, he had found a place where he could rest, even if only for a little while. The fire crackled softly, the wind whispered through the trees, and the night stretched on. Outside, the plains were still wide and empty, full of danger and uncertainty. But inside, the cabin held warmth, shelter, and a small, unspoken bond between two people who had seen the harshest sides of life, and were learning slowly that trust and human connection could exist even in the darkest moments. And so the first night passed, with tension, relief, and the quiet beginning of an unexpected understanding. The cowboy had found refuge, and the widowed Apache woman had made a choice, one that would change both of their lives, even if they did not yet realize it. Morning came slowly, with the soft light of the sun spilling over the horizon and turning the plains into a sea of gold. The wind had calmed, and the world felt a little less threatening than the night before. In the small cabin, the cowboy Jake was awake before dawn. He had slept fitfully, half conscious of every creak of the floorboards, every movement of the trees outside. Even in safety, he could not shake the fear that the outlaws might appear at any moment. He sat quietly by the fire, rubbing the soreness out of his shoulders and stretching his stiff arms. His horse was tethered just outside, chewing on the dry grass, looking as exhausted as its rider. The cabin was peaceful now, the kind of quiet that felt almost too perfect, too calm after the terror of the previous days. Yet, as much as Jake wanted to relax, he knew that trust was something earned, not given, and he had to be careful not to assume too much about the woman who had led him into her home. The woman, whose name was Kaya, moved around the cabin with calm precision. She lit the fire, brought water from a nearby well, and prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal and dried fruit. Her movements were efficient and deliberate, each action showing the strength and experience of someone who had learned to live alone in a harsh land. She did not rush, nor did she make unnecessary noise. Every gesture was purposeful, and Jake could not help but admire her quiet confidence. "Eat," Kaya said finally, sliding a small plate toward him. Her voice was soft but steady. "You need your strength if you're going to survive out there." "Thank you," Jake said, taking the plate. He did not ask questions about her life yet, not wanting to seem intrusive. He understood the value of silence, especially in a place like this, where trust was fragile. They ate together in quiet, each aware of the other but not forcing conversation. It was a quiet understanding, a way to coexist while navigating the uncertainty of the moment. After breakfast, Jake tended to his horse. He brushed it down, checked its hooves, and gave it some water. The animal had carried him through days of danger, and he treated it with care, knowing that it was as much a companion as it was a means of survival. Kaya watched him from the doorway, her expression neutral but attentive. She could see that he was capable and careful, qualities that made her feel slightly more at ease with his presence. Hours passed, and the morning turned into afternoon. Jake wanted to ask Kaya questions, to understand who she was and why she lived so far from the nearest town, but he sensed that it was not the right time. Trust was still fragile, and too many questions might break it. Instead, he watched her work, noticing the small details of her life, the way she arranged her belongings, the neatness of her tools, the care with which she tended the small garden outside. Every action spoke of someone who had learned to survive and thrive alone, someone who had faced loss and hardship but refused to let it define her. "Do you live here alone?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," Kaya replied simply. "I have for many years." She did not elaborate, and Jake did not press. He understood enough. Life alone in a place like this required strength, patience, and resilience, qualities he had glimpsed in her already. As the day went on, Jake and Kaya slowly began to talk. Their conversation was careful at first, cautious and measured. Jake spoke of his travels, the dangers he had faced, and the mistakes that had brought him to this moment. Kaya listened without judgment, sometimes offering brief comments or questions, sometimes remaining silent. It was clear that she had experienced her own hardships, and that understanding created a bridge between them. "You've been through a lot," Kaya said quietly at one point. "It shows in your eyes. You're not just tired, you're carrying something heavier than the sun on your back." Jake nodded. "I've made my share of mistakes. I'm lucky to be alive right now. That's all I can say." They spoke little after that, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with a growing sense of mutual respect. Jake realized that Kaya's home was not just a shelter from the outlaws. It was a place where he could begin to feel human again, even for a short while. He could rest without constantly fearing the next attack, and in her presence, he felt a quiet reassurance that he had not felt in days. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the plains. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees and sending small clouds of dust across the yard. Kaya went about her chores, gathering firewood and tending to her small garden. Jake wanted to help, but he did not want to offend her. Still, she seemed to welcome his presence, letting him assist with minor tasks, carrying wood, filling the water bucket, or repairing a small fence near the corral. In doing these tasks together, they began to build an unspoken trust, each learning to rely on the other in small, careful ways. As the day drew to a close, the shadows grew longer and the air became cooler. Jake noticed the first stars beginning to appear in the sky, twinkling faintly against the deepening blue. The sense of danger that had followed him for so long was still present, but it felt distant now, muted by the safety of the cabin and the presence of someone who had shown him kindness. He allowed himself to relax slightly, leaning against the doorway and watching Kaya move around her home with quiet purpose. There was a rhythm to her movements that he found comforting. She swept the floor, tended the fire, and arranged her few belongings in neat, deliberate ways. It was clear that she had created a life of order and control in a world that often seemed chaotic and dangerous. Jake thought about the journeys he had taken, the endless days on the road, and the constant fear of being caught or betrayed. In comparison, Kaya's life seemed simple and grounded, yet full of quiet strength. As the evening settled, they sat near the fire, talking softly about survival, the land, and the challenges of living far from others. Jake shared some of his experiences, careful not to reveal too much, while Kaya listened and occasionally offered insights or advice. It was a conversation built on mutual respect, on understanding the value of life, and on the quiet recognition of strength in one another. "You're learning to survive, not just run," Kaya said gently. "That's different. That takes more than speed or skill with a gun. It takes patience, courage, and the ability to see what really matters." Jake nodded slowly. He realized she was right. He had been running for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to live rather than just survive. Her words struck a chord with him, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a small spark of clarity. Life was not just about escaping danger. It was about understanding it, facing it, and finding ways to continue, even when the odds were against you. Night fell fully, bringing with it a deep, quiet darkness. The stars shone brightly above, and the wind whispered through the trees outside. Jake lay on the blanket he had spread near the fire, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle into his bones. Kaya moved around quietly, checking the fire and making sure everything was secure. There was no threat tonight, at least none that they could see, and the peace of the cabin allowed him to rest in a way he had not for days. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake reflected on the day. He had found a place of safety, a moment of respite in the chaos of his life. He had met someone strong and capable, someone who had shown him that trust could exist even in a world filled with danger. And though the outlaws were still out there, still searching, he felt a small sense of hope. Hope that he could survive, hope that he could learn from this encounter, and hope that life, even in its harshest moments, still held moments of connection and understanding. In that cabin, two strangers had begun to weave a quiet bond, built on survival, respect, and the slow, careful recognition of each other's strength. The night was long, and the dangers of the plains were never far, but for this one day, for this one moment, they had found a fragile peace. And in that peace, the first seeds of trust and understanding had begun to grow. The next morning, the first light of dawn crept slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across the land. Jake stirred from his makeshift bed near the fire, the warmth of the cabin offering a comfort he had not felt in days. The previous day had been one of cautious trust and quiet observation, but today promised new challenges. The cowboy knew the outlaws were still out there, searching for him. They would not give up easily, and the thought of them pushed him into alertness, even within the safety of the cabin walls. Kaya had been awake before him, as usual, moving quietly around the small cabin. She carried herself with ease, each movement purposeful and careful. Her hands were strong, skilled from years of living alone in the harsh plains, yet there was a softness in the way she handled the simple objects in her home. Water from the well, firewood from the stack outside, and the small garden she tended, all these tasks were done with a rhythm that spoke of experience and endurance. Jake watched her from the corner of the room, noticing the balance of strength and calm in her every action. "Morning," Kaya said softly without looking up. "You slept well." Jake shook his head slightly, rubbing his eyes. "As well as I could, I guess. Hard to sleep when your life depends on staying hidden." She gave a small, understanding nod, not judgmental but acknowledging the truth in his words. "The outlaws won't give up easily," she said, "and you have no choice but to stay alert." Jake stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the previous day's ride. Every movement reminded him of how worn down he was. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a spark of determination. He knew he had to be ready, both mentally and physically, if he hoped to survive what lay ahead. The cabin was quiet, the only sounds being the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of the trees outside. Jake helped Kaya with small chores, carrying water from the well and stacking firewood. The work was simple but necessary, and it offered him a chance to regain some strength. In the process, he observed Kaya more closely. Her movements were careful, her gaze sharp, and her instincts alert. She was a woman shaped by survival, someone who had faced loss and danger and had emerged stronger for it. As the sun climbed higher, they decided to prepare a small meal. Kaya took the lead, showing Jake how to cook over the open flame and how to handle the food carefully in a place far from stores or towns. Jake watched and learned, realizing that survival was about more than just running from danger. It was about understanding the land, the resources, and the people around you. He began to feel a growing respect for Kaya, not just for her skill, but for the way she carried herself with quiet confidence and calm authority. Once the meal was ready, they ate together in silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. Jake thought about the outlaws, the threat that had driven him to this cabin, and the precariousness of his situation. He knew that any wrong move could be fatal, yet he also felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that for now he was safe. The cabin offered more than just shelter. It offered a brief respite from fear and a chance to gather strength. After eating, Jake went outside to check on his horse. The animal was restless, sensing the tension in the air, and Jake spent time calming it, brushing its coat, and ensuring it was ready for any sudden need to flee. Kaya joined him briefly, offering advice on caring for the horse and sharing small observations about the land. "You have to understand it," she said. "The plains can be unforgiving, but if you know how to read them, they can also keep you alive." The afternoon brought a new layer of tension. From the distance, faint sounds of hoofbeats and shouts reached their ears. Jake's heart tightened. The outlaws were nearby, perhaps searching for him or checking the surrounding area. Kaya moved with quiet efficiency, closing windows, securing doors, and preparing small weapons for defense. The cabin became a place of readiness, a temporary fortress against the unknown. Jake watched her closely, noting how calm she remained despite the danger. Her presence was a steadying force, and he realized that trust was growing between them. She had taken a risk by letting him into her home, and now she was demonstrating that her skills and instincts could protect both of them. For the first time in weeks, he felt that he was not entirely alone, that someone besides himself understood the stakes and was willing to face them with him. Hours passed, the sounds outside eventually fading into the distance. The outlaws had not come closer, but the tension lingered. Jake felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him again, yet he could not afford to let his guard down completely. Kaya suggested they take turns keeping watch, and he agreed, realizing that cooperation was their best chance of surviving the days ahead. Even as they worked together, a quiet connection was growing. They shared stories of their pasts, not in great detail, but enough to reveal pieces of who they were. Jake spoke of travels across distant towns, of days spent running from danger, and of the lessons learned through hardship. Kaya spoke of living alone, of surviving in a world that often seemed indifferent, and of the strength it required to endure loss without losing oneself. By evening, a sense of understanding had formed between them. They moved through the cabin with a rhythm that was almost like a dance, each aware of the other's presence and habits. Jake began to realize that this fragile bond was not just about survival. It was about learning to trust again, to find human connection in a world that often offered only danger. As night fell, they sat near the fire once more. The stars began to appear in the sky, brilliant and distant, offering a sense of wonder and perspective. Kaya worked quietly, maintaining the fire and preparing for the long night ahead. Jake watched her, noticing the patience and precision in her movements. It was clear that she had faced countless challenges and had learned to face each one with calm determination. "You're learning," Kaya said at one point, breaking the silence. "Not just how to survive, but how to understand what matters. That's more important than any gun or horse." Jake nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He had spent so much time running that he had forgotten the importance of understanding, of seeing the world clearly instead of reacting to it. Kaya's guidance, though subtle, was opening his eyes to new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching danger and life itself. The night grew darker, the wind whispering through the trees outside. The cabin remained a small, secure haven against the vast and unpredictable plains. Jake lay near the fire, exhausted but aware, reflecting on the lessons of the day. He realized that survival was not just about speed or skill. It was about awareness, cooperation, and understanding the strengths of those around you. For Kaya, the day had reinforced her belief in the importance of vigilance and preparation. She had let a stranger into her home, but she had also seen his courage, his determination, and his willingness to learn. There was a quiet respect forming between them, a mutual understanding that they could depend on each other, at least for now. The first night had been about trust. The second day had been about learning and connection. Now, as the second night approached, the real test of survival and resilience was about to begin. Both knew that the outlaws could return at any moment, that danger was never far away, and that their bond would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. But for now, there was a moment of calm. Jake felt the warmth of the fire, the security of the cabin, and the quiet strength of the woman beside him. It was enough to sustain him, enough to remind him that even in the harshest landscapes, even when chased by relentless danger, moments of understanding, trust, and human connection could exist. In that cabin, two lives were beginning to intertwine, not by choice, but by circumstance and necessity. They were learning from each other, relying on each other, and slowly building the foundation of trust that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. And so, the day ended with quiet anticipation. The plains outside remained vast, wild, and unpredictable, but inside the cabin, Jake and Kaya had found a fragile sense of stability. They were not just surviving. They were beginning to understand what it meant to live, to connect, and to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. The following day began quietly, with the soft light of dawn filtering through the cracks in the cabin walls. Jake woke early, as he often did, his body still sore from the long ride and the tension of constantly looking over his shoulder. The outlaws had not appeared during the night, but he knew better than to think they had given up. Danger could arrive at any moment, and the plains had no mercy for the unprepared. Kaya was already awake, moving around the cabin with her usual calm efficiency. She tended the small fire, checked the water supply, and arranged a few tools near the door. Every movement was deliberate, showing a woman who had learned to live independently and survive in a world that was rarely kind. Jake watched her, admiring not only her skill but also the quiet confidence she exuded. She was someone shaped by hardship, yet she faced each day with a steady determination that was both inspiring and reassuring. "Morning," Kaya said, her voice soft but carrying a steady authority. "We need to make sure we're ready for anything today." Jake nodded. "I know. I don't want to make your home a target, but I also can't stay idle." She gave a small nod, acknowledging the truth in his words. "We'll prepare. Then we wait, and we act only when necessary." The morning was spent checking the cabin's perimeter and ensuring that everything was secure. Kaya showed Jake how to notice subtle signs of movement in the surrounding forest, how to identify tracks, and how to detect changes in the wind that could indicate approaching riders. Jake absorbed every detail, realizing that survival was as much about awareness as it was about speed or weapons. Every lesson Kaya shared strengthened his confidence, giving him skills he had not possessed before. By midday, the sun had climbed high, and the heat of the plains pressed down on them. Jake helped Kaya with chores, carrying water, stacking firewood, and checking the horse. The work was repetitive but necessary, and it allowed them to move together in quiet cooperation. With each task, their trust in each other deepened. They were no longer just strangers sharing the same space. They had become a team, relying on each other to navigate the dangers that surrounded them. As they rested for a short break, Kaya spoke quietly, her eyes scanning the horizon. "The outlaws won't stop until they find you," she said. "We have to be ready for when they come, and we have to be careful. One wrong move and everything could be lost." Jake listened carefully. He had feared the outlaws for days, but hearing Kaya's calm, strategic approach gave him a sense of direction. He realized that panic would not save him, but preparation and patience could. He began to see that survival was not just about running. It was about understanding the land, the people, and the timing of every action. The afternoon brought an unexpected challenge. While checking the surrounding area for signs of movement, Jake noticed faint tracks in the dirt, recent and heading toward the cabin. His heart raced. He signaled to Kaya, who quickly assessed the situation. Together, they moved quietly back to the cabin, barricading the door and readying themselves for potential confrontation. The tension was palpable, each sound outside causing them both to freeze and listen. Hours passed slowly, the heat pressing down and the wind rustling the trees outside. The tracks remained faint, but the possibility of danger loomed. Jake felt the weight of fear pressing down on him, but Kaya's calm presence helped steady his nerves. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking the fire, preparing the water, and ensuring that everything in the cabin was secure. Her confidence was contagious, and he realized that courage was often less about fearlessness and more about control and preparation. As evening approached, the sun casting long shadows over the plains, they sat together near the fire. The shared silence was comfortable now, filled with understanding and mutual respect. Jake felt a growing admiration for Kaya, not just for her survival skills, but for the quiet wisdom and patience she had cultivated through years of living alone. She was teaching him more than just practical skills. She was teaching him how to endure, how to face uncertainty, and how to remain calm in the midst of danger. "You've changed since you arrived here," Kaya said quietly, breaking the silence. "You're calmer, more aware, and more patient. That will help you survive, not just today, but in the days ahead." Jake nodded, appreciating the observation. He realized she was right. Before coming here, he had been constantly running, driven by fear and instinct. Now, he was learning to approach each situation with thought, strategy, and awareness. He understood that survival was not just about fleeing danger. It was about preparation, observation, and using every skill at one's disposal. Night fell fully, and the cabin became a small island of warmth and light in the darkness of the plains. The outlaws had not arrived, but the tension of anticipation remained. Jake and Kaya kept the fire small, shadows flickering against the walls as they moved quietly. They spoke sparingly, exchanging observations about the day and thoughts about what might come next. The connection between them had deepened, built on shared experience, trust, and the understanding that each was stronger with the other's support. As the hours passed, Jake found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned from Kaya. She had taught him the importance of patience, the value of careful observation, and the power of quiet resilience. She had shown him that strength was not only physical but mental and emotional, and that trust could be formed even in the most challenging circumstances. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he was learning not just to survive, but to live with purpose and awareness. The night was long, with the sounds of the plains surrounding the cabin, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an animal, and the whisper of the wind. Every sound was a reminder of the outside world, a world that was both beautiful and dangerous. Jake remained alert but found comfort in Kaya's presence. She was a steadying force, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, human connection could provide strength and courage. Late into the night, Jake and Kaya shared stories of their pasts, carefully chosen and measured. Jake spoke of the towns he had traveled through, the dangers he had faced, and the mistakes he had made. Kaya spoke of her life in the cabin, her losses, and the lessons she had learned from living alone. Their words were a bridge, connecting their experiences and creating a sense of understanding and empathy. By the time sleep came, Jake felt a sense of readiness he had not felt before. He understood that danger was still out there waiting, but he also knew that he had the skills, the awareness, and the support of someone he could trust to face it. Kaya had taught him that strength was not about fighting alone, but about learning, observing, and relying on others when necessary. In that quiet cabin, two strangers had formed a bond that went beyond simple survival. They had become partners in endurance, each learning from the other, each finding reassurance in shared knowledge and careful preparation. The outlaws were still out there, but Jake no longer felt entirely helpless. He had gained not just a place of refuge, but a mentor, a guide, and a source of quiet strength. As the night deepened, the fire burned low, casting soft shadows across the cabin walls. Jake lay on his blanket, feeling the exhaustion of the day, but also a sense of purpose. He understood that the challenges ahead would not be easy, but he felt ready to face them. The lessons of the day, the guidance of Kaya, and the quiet bond they had formed were now his tools for survival. And so the fourth day passed, a day of preparation, awareness, and deepening connection. The outlaws remained a threat, unpredictable and relentless, but within the cabin, Jake had found something more valuable than safety alone. He had found understanding, trust, and a growing sense of strength that came not just from skill, but from human connection and shared experience. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the vast plains and the endless sky, two lives had intertwined, not by chance, but by circumstance, necessity, and the growing recognition of each other's strength. The coming days would test them, push them to their limits, and demand courage and patience. But for this night at least, they had found a fragile peace, a foundation upon which they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm, golden light across the land. Jake stirred from his blanket near the fire, stretching stiff muscles that had been tense for days. The night had been quiet, but he knew better than to believe that the danger had completely passed. The outlaws were still out there somewhere searching, and he could not afford to be careless. Every sound carried meaning, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird, even the movement of his own horse outside the cabin. Kaya was already awake as usual, moving with quiet precision. She tended the fire, filled water jugs, and checked the cabin for any signs of weakness in its defenses. Jake watched her, feeling a mixture of admiration and respect. She had not only protected herself for years, but had now shared her skills and wisdom with him. In doing so, she had given him more than safety. She had given him knowledge and the confidence to face what was coming. "Good morning," Kaya said softly, her eyes scanning the horizon as she spoke. "Today may be the day they find us. We have to stay alert." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready," he said. "Whatever comes, I'll do my part." They spent the morning preparing for the possibility of confrontation. Kaya reinforced the doors and windows, setting small traps and signals in case someone tried to approach the cabin. Jake helped with these tasks, learning quickly under her guidance. Each action required focus and care, and together they worked efficiently, their movements in sync without needing to speak much. The bond between them had grown stronger through shared effort and quiet understanding. By midday, the tension outside had eased slightly, but both remained vigilant. They ate a simple meal together, speaking only in whispers. Their conversation was careful but meaningful, touching on lessons learned, past experiences, and the importance of resilience. Jake reflected on how much he had changed since arriving at Kaya's cabin. He was no longer just a man running from danger. He had learned patience, observation, and the value of human connection. As the afternoon heat pressed down on the plains, Jake and Kaya took turns keeping watch. From the small window, Jake scanned the horizon for any sign of movement, while Kaya prepared supplies and maintained the cabin. The silence was punctuated only by the wind and distant sounds of the plains. Hours passed slowly, and with each passing moment, Jake's appreciation for Kaya grew. She was more than a protector. She was a teacher, a guide, and a steady presence in a world that had offered him little else but chaos and danger. The sun began to lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Jake could feel the tension building as evening approached. He knew that if the outlaws returned, the night would be the most dangerous time. The cabin, while secure, could only protect them for so long. Kaya's calm presence was reassuring, but he also understood that their survival would depend on vigilance, quick thinking, and trust in each other. As dusk settled, they prepared for the night. Kaya checked the fire, ensuring it was small but sufficient for warmth and light. Jake helped secure the horse and checked the perimeter once more. They moved with a quiet efficiency, each trusting the other to perform their tasks without oversight. It was a dance of cooperation, built on experience, understanding, and mutual respect. Night fell, deep and silent, the stars bright in the clear sky above. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, beautiful yet dangerous. Jake and Kaya sat near the fire, speaking quietly. Their conversation turned to the future, to what might come after this night, and to the lessons they had learned from one another. "You've changed since you arrived here," Kaya said softly. "You're calmer, stronger, and more aware. That will serve you well wherever you go next." Jake smiled faintly, feeling the weight of her words. "I've learned a lot from you," he replied. "Not just how to survive, but how to think, how to plan, and how to trust. You've taught me more than I realized." The night wore on, and the sounds of the plains created a constant, subtle tension. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves could signal the approach of danger. But they were ready. Kaya's careful preparations and Jake's growing awareness gave them confidence. They had formed a partnership, two people facing the world together, stronger than they would have been alone. Hours later, the wind shifted and faint sounds reached their ears, horses in the distance, voices carried by the night air. The outlaws had returned. Jake and Kaya exchanged a glance, a silent communication of readiness and determination. They moved quietly to their positions, prepared for what might come, each aware that their lives depended on careful observation and swift action. The night passed with heightened tension, the outlaws circling but unable to locate the cabin. Kaya's knowledge of the land and the subtle signals they had set up kept them safe. Jake followed her lead, learning to anticipate threats and react with precision. The danger was real, but together they navigated it with calm efficiency. By the time the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, the outlaws had given up for the moment, leaving the plains quiet once more. Exhausted but relieved, Jake and Kaya sat near the fire, reflecting on what had happened. The night had tested them, challenged their skills and patience, and forced them to rely on each other completely. They had survived not just through strength and vigilance, but through trust, understanding, and careful cooperation. "You did well," Kaya said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "You kept calm and followed through. That's not easy when fear is so close." Jake nodded. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "You taught me everything I needed to know to get through this night." The experience had created a bond between them, a connection forged under pressure and strengthened by mutual respect. They had faced danger together, learned from each other, and emerged stronger for it. Jake realized that survival was not just about fleeing or fighting. It was about understanding, preparing and trusting those around you. As the day progressed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, Jake knew it was time to make a decision. The outlaws would not stop completely, and he could not remain in the cabin forever. Kaya understood this too. They had shared a remarkable journey of learning, trust, and resilience, but now the time had come for him to move forward. "Where will you go?" Kaya asked softly as they prepared for his departure. "I don't know yet," Jake admitted. "But I do know that I'm stronger than I was before. I've learned how to survive and I've learned how to trust. That will help me wherever I go," Kaya nodded. "You've earned your strength and you've earned the ability to carry it with you. Remember what you've learned here." With careful preparation, Jake saddled his horse and checked his gear. Kaya gave him a small package of supplies, food, water, and tools for the journey ahead. There was no need for long goodbyes. Their bond was understood through shared experience, respect, and unspoken understanding. As he rode away from the cabin, the plains stretching endlessly before him, Jake felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and determination. He had survived the danger, learned the lessons he needed, and formed a connection that had changed him. Kaya had given him more than safety. She had given him guidance, knowledge, and the confidence to face whatever lay ahead. He looked back once at the small cabin nestled at the edge of the trees. The woman who had taken a risk by allowing him into her home had taught him the most important lessons of all: trust, patience, and the strength found in human connection. He would carry these lessons with him, wherever the journey led. The wind blew across the plains, the sun shining brightly, and the open landscape stretched endlessly in every direction. Jake rode forward with a sense of purpose, knowing that danger might return, but also knowing that he had the skills and awareness to survive. The experiences he had shared with Kaya would stay with him, shaping him into a man who could face the challenges of the world with courage, wisdom, and resilience. By the time he disappeared into the distant horizon, the cabin remained a quiet sanctuary, a place where two lives had intersected and left lasting impressions. The plains were vast and unpredictable, but Jake now carried the lessons of survival, trust, and strength. The journey ahead would be long, but he felt ready, equipped not only with skills, but with understanding and confidence born from one of the most difficult and instructive experiences of his life. And so the story concluded, not with dramatic battles or violence, but with the quiet triumph of survival, trust, and human connection. Jake rode on, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future might hold, while Kaya returned to her routines, her home a place of resilience, strength, and quiet compassion. The encounter had changed them both, leaving behind lessons that neither would forget, and a memory of courage and understanding forged in the harsh beauty of the plains.